Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. And it's my great pleasure to welcome to today's program Ajesh Kapoor, who is Senior Director of Transportation Management at GT Nexus. And today we're going to talk about a new model for managing global transportation. And global transportation is a topic that we've talked about a few times on this program. And the reality is that there's so much complexity, so much going on in that side of supply chain management. That a lot of companies are really looking for best practices and new ideas in terms of how to manage that effectively, because it is very different than managing domestic transportation. And obviously the two often come together when you're doing end-to-end moves. So it's great to have Ajesh here today to really talk through some of the challenges and opportunities that customers are facing, as well as the role that technology can play in helping to facilitate the management of global transportation. Before we get started, I just want to remind those of you that are joining us live today that part of our goal here at Talking Logistics is to make this conversational. So if you do have a question or a comment for Ajesh, you can do so via the question button or the chat feature. And certainly if we have time and it's a good and appropriate question, I'll try to weave it into the conversation. If you are joining us as a visitor, just a reminder that you do have to sign up first in order to be able to ask a question. So with that, Ajesh, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Adrian. Glad to be here.
Great. So, before we dive into the topic, I always like to ask my guests, how they even got involved in this industry, just to provide some context and, to the rest of the conversation. So why don't you tell us briefly a little bit about your career path, how and why you got involved in supply chain logistics, and what your current role and responsibilities are there at GT Nexus.
Yeah, I think the start was back in Georgia Tech. I joined the master's program in ISYE Operations Research, and when we were starting out back then, it was the logistics lab upstairs, got involved in there, and we were starting the Logistics Institute at the time. That same year, and it just took off from there. So started out with a company called CAPS Logistics, did some network design, did some routing and scheduling, was on the front end of transportation planning, and worked with a number of TMS providers in a partnership mode, and then helped build a couple of them in there. From there, I went on to co-found a company called GeoCom TMS. We were in the fleet planning and fleet management space for a long, long time. Like a number of other companies, they are part of JDA now. On the fleet planning side, we were trying to approach the vehicle routing and scheduling from an optimization perspective, a different kind of optimization, not the basic heuristics there. Then I ran the supply chain consulting organization for a large system integrator. It's called Wipro Technologies, focused on large retail, CPG, and transportation companies, and kept going through multiple system implementations, including a lot of transportation management implementations. And it was crazy to see how long and how expensive these implementations always were. And we were trying to do the same things, achieve the same things, but inherently the design would not let you do that. So GT Nexus presented an interesting opportunity in that there was a lot of expertise on the international transportation side, a lot of focus on communities and collaboration, and bringing physical, financial, and data part of the supply chain together on one platform. So I managed the transportation management product line at GT Nexus, including product strategy, product marketing, the positioning out there, the design of the product. So thanks again for having me here to talk about how we see the transportation management world.
Yeah, great background. Obviously, you have a lot of long-term history with the transportation management market. Obviously, a lot has happened. I mean, I've been looking at TMS solutions for over 16 years, and when you look at that span of that time period, it's amazing to see how much has changed from the technology side of things, and but also some of the things that stay the same. Some of the challenges that companies have still remain the same. So a lot of great opportunities still for improvement, and a lot of continued innovation going on the transportation side. But before we talk about the technology piece of it, let's start with what you're hearing from customers regarding global transportation management. What challenges are they facing? What are their objectives, and are they different today than they were a few years ago?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things going on in the market today. There is traditional TM has been a functional application, and that's pretty much how the customers wanted to see that market and wanted to see those offerings. At the same time, for a long time, the economy went through a downturn, and that only put more pressure on cost reduction, and people kept approaching it that way. But the evolution from logistics to a better view of the supply chain, I think, contributed to some of it. But then it got to where cost reduction still is an objective of most of the supply chain initiatives. But at the same time, people are starting to look at an enterprise supply chain, a complex supply chain, and trying to use that to enhance their customer experience, the end customer experience. And the TM solutions, the way they provide cost reduction in silos, that is still available. At the same time, what the customer is looking for today, what the larger organizations are looking for with a distributed supply chain, complex supply chain, they're looking to get a global view of the supply chain. They're trying to become more responsive, more agile, and how they respond to fluctuations in demand, how they respond to any of the catastrophes that seem to be becoming a little more regular in nature. So if you can respond to those things, I think that becomes a bigger requirement, and that's where I think we are going.
Yeah, I mean, I think, certainly I think I would echo some of the things you just said there. Certainly I think when it comes to transportation management, cost and cost improvement and savings is always kind of the very high on the priority list, and something that transportation executives always keep an eye on. But you're right. I mean, I think one of the things you hear consistently, over the years is the importance of visibility from a supply chain, end-to-end supply chain standpoint, and obviously transportation feeds into that. And the ability for customers, I think what I'm hearing from a lot of executives is that change is happening so, the competitive landscape and customer requirements, so on and so forth, is happening so rapidly that really having that visibility to be able to make quote unquote smarter decisions faster is something that, they're looking more and more to do. But let me ask you about that visibility, because I think that's an area, like I said, that a lot of executives, talk about. They view that as a priority, and it's becoming increasingly important, as you said, from a global transportation management standpoint. But historically, it's been one that's been difficult to achieve. This end-to-end visibility. What does end-to-end visibility mean from a global transportation management perspective? Why is it important, and why has it been so elusive for companies to achieve?
There are a couple of things going on, Adrian. I don't know if it was, I think it was not a case of people trying to communicate what was not available, but a lot of people thought that applications like TM on their own would provide end-to-end visibility. And there is still, in some cases, there's still some confusion around what track and trace means and what visibility, when you approach it from an end-to-end supply chain visibility, is all about. So first of all, I don't know if it is a controversial statement or not, but TMS is inherently not able to provide, just by the design of it, cannot provide end-to-end supply chain visibility. The big part that comes in is you have to bring both the transportation and non-transportation information, link it all together, and have the ability to go down to a level where you are able to look at product moving through the supply chain at any given point of time. I think that becomes critical, and the only way to do that is to do it in steps, but at the same time, just don't lose the don't get into a perspective of, if I can figure out where a particular shipment is in my supply chain, that translates into some kind of end-to-end supply chain visibility. Because there are two things we are looking at. One, when we bring in the transportation part of it, even that is so disconnected, so siloed, the way it is modeled, the way it gets tracked. We tend to track parts of the supply chain and we don't connect those parts of the supply chain. So the second piece that comes in is when you do the transportation part of it, you bring in the blind spots that are when the inventory is stationary in certain locations, and you have to fill those blind spots. You have to get information around those to figure out exactly what the impact is, because end-to-end supply chain visibility is a great goal. It's a good term out there, but exactly what we are trying to achieve with it, that part becomes more critical. So when we talk about end-to-end supply chain visibility, we are trying to react. We are trying to become more agile, more responsive. And for that, what we are trying to do is we are trying to figure out where all the inventory is. And if you go back to the design of TM, I referred to that earlier, is there has always been this assumption that we basically roll up the transportation or product information and we just use it for transportation planning and managing it. And that doesn't really work very well because you lose track of the actual product that is moving in that particular carton, in that particular container, in that particular trailer. And that's where I think we need to take the visibility side, feed the transportation information in there, connect the different silos within the supply chain and bring it all together. I think that's where we are going.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought there because you're right. I mean, I think visibility is just inherently goes beyond, when you talk about supply chain visibility, it inherently goes beyond just the transportation side of things. I mean, a lot of companies are looking to tie in the purchase order along with the shipment, along with visibility to inventory and other, aspects that, you can define as part of that broader end-to-end, visibility picture. And, a TMS, to your point, by itself, may not necessarily have access to all those data points that help inform kind of the full picture of end-to-end, supply chain visibility. Of course, another point that I want to talk to you a little bit later in the conversation is that, something I've always talked about is that, when it comes to, software, and this is particularly true for transportation and any business process that's inherently network centric, is that it goes beyond software, that you really need that B2B connectivity and community that also needs to be part of that to be able to bring in that data, that information, along with the software aspect side of things. But I want to talk, but before we kind of talk about that, let's talk about another aspect of technology now and how cloud-based solutions or network-based solutions or supply chain operating networks, as I like to call them, are enabling new approaches to global transportation management. First, there's a lot of talk today about platforms. From your perspective, what's the difference between a transportation management application and a transportation management platform?
I like the way you made the distinction between just cloud. Cloud we see as an enabler of different things that we can do with it, right? It's one of those things where the network is what provides the value, and when we bring a network, we are talking about a pretty large network when we are trying to manage transportation. So it's not, we start thinking around the carriers being part of the supply chain, but when we really look at it, it starts from our suppliers, it goes into our freight forwarders and 3PLs, and it looks at the banks where you are processing all the payments for both the goods and the freight and warehousing and third parties. So there is a larger group that you are trying to bring together from a partner perspective. There is also a number of internal and external applications that you are trying to integrate. The way we have always looked at it, and we have implemented these things, like I said earlier, it's the application approach to transportation management that leaves out the fact that transportation data, when you go across the different regions, the different verticals, it fundamentally stays the same. the processes around that, the way you manage transportation, the geographic variations do come in from a process perspective. How you use that data, how you bring it in, how you create your plans, how you pay for things, how you execute things, all those things change, but inherently the data does not really change that much. So the concept we are trying to put out there is this distinction between the application and the platform. And the application is basically the functionality and the functional pieces where we go. And platform is underneath that. It is inherently connected to a visibility application, feeding it sometimes, getting information from it sometimes for exception management. But the basic idea is that if you have multiple ERP instances that are feeding data directly into multiple applications today on a point-to-point integration basis, you are trying to make it common and you are trying to route it through a platform. You're trying to route it through the control layer where it goes in and it has access to different parts of the organization. Different applications are feeding into it. Different applications are working off of this data, but it always comes back in there. The partners are working off of this data also. But again, by bringing it back into the platform, you can actually link that information. You can link different parts of the supply chain and provide a comprehensive view of what is going on from a transportation perspective across your supply chain. That's literally the idea of separating the platform from the application side of it.
So, I mean, just to kind of think of it perhaps in a different way, and I'm a big, people have been reading my blog and listening to, these episodes know I'm a big proponent of the supply chain operating network model and, network-based, solutions. I guess some companies would take the approach to say, well, if I have a single instance TMS across my entire business, they would view that as a platform. What would that approach? What's the difference between that approach and, let's say a cloud approach to that?
So there are a couple of things going on here. One, when we look at, you used an interesting term there, a single instance TMS implementation. I haven't actually seen too many of those. So when you bring those things in, even in a single instance, the way things get modeled is there are geography specific instances within that instance of how you are planning. Now, a couple of things that happen. One, once you create the plan, the information that is coming back from a status messaging side of it, from a visibility side of it, there is very little that happens in terms of a feedback loop, in terms of exception management that actually looks at it, all the planning instances linked together. Now, when we think about a network, we are thinking about, okay, from a TM perspective, we have a transportation planning instance there. We have stuff going on. But at the same time, all these partners, when we look at it, the way they are integrated into that application directly. Now, it stops there. It basically becomes an integration perspective. When you take it to the next level, you basically say, yeah, I'm spending a lot of costs, a lot of money to integrate those partners and communicate with those partners. And it is when I build those integrations and when I'm maintaining those integrations, those are big parts of any TM implementation project. Now, when we take it to a network setting, it's not just about integrations, right? It is integrations come in, and integrations, when you are in a network model, you actually can utilize and reduce some of that integration cost. But then you take the next step because there is an operational component to taking a network and building that into a community and enhancing collaboration. So all these communities, if you think of them as mini communities coming together into a larger community, so a carrier coming together with a 3PL, with a supplier, with the shipper community, that is the larger community that you are trying to bring together on an operating network like this. Now, so there is a collaboration component because it's a multi-enterprise process that we are trying to do here, and if people are looking at the same data and actually collaborating using that same data, operational perspective, it becomes way more efficient. You're not relying on emails, you're not relying on sending out spreadsheets, you're actually looking at the same information and you're collaborating. But then there is the second part of this network, which takes us to the community side of it. And that becomes way more strategic, way more important over time. Because we think about it as, at a very basic level, we think about, and we have seen, data quality being a major challenge in these things, but getting improved as a community starts working towards those goals. So how does it do that? It basically comes in, communities, when they come together, they can establish benchmarks, they can establish standards, because they are doing it together. They are listening to each other, they are collaborating with each other, they are saying, yes, these standards make sense, this is how we communicate, this information is important to you. So you're bringing that part of it, and that is what the carriers are looking for. They are able to provide you that information. They want to provide you that information. They want to do a good job of it. But at the same time, if they are talking with 200 shippers on a point-to-point basis, looking at different requirements, it becomes challenging on that side. At the same time, when the shipper is trying to do it on their own, they're not listening to other shippers. They don't know how the other shippers may be dealing with the same thing. So communities, in terms of driving standards and driving benchmarks, they actually help a lot, not just with the day-to-day data quality, but defining those standards and defining those benchmarks. I think the operating networks become so much more important than just reducing the integration costs in these kind of cases.
Those are all great points, and the point about data quality management, I think, is right on. It's something that I've been talking a lot about, and obviously, the network as a platform for communication and collaboration, and kind of bringing it beyond just simple integration, which is really what was going to be my next question. You touched upon this a little bit. Obviously, when you when you see the number of external parties involved in global transportation management, right? You've got the carriers, you've got the freight forwarders, you've got the 3PLs, banks, and so on. B2B communication collaboration is critical, which again, as we just talked about, is one of the key differentiators of a network-based, cloud-based, solution. But, the question I always get, and I'd love to hear your perspective, is, well, how is a cloud-based, a cloud platform, a network-based approach different from kind of the traditional B2B integration approach, which is, traditionally via EDI?
So, good question. The EDI part of it is one. So EDI doesn't go away in a lot of cases, but at the same time, it's takes advantage of the economies there, because you're looking at one connection to the platform instead of creating point-to-point integrations every single time you have to do it. Now, that is, like I said, it's only part of it. The other big part of it is when we look at, let's say, the domestic side of things, when we look at smaller carriers trying to integrate with you, them getting on the platform and finding a place to work on the platform where they can look across shippers and conduct their operations right there, in looking at what loads are available to them, how they respond to those things. All those things come in. So the alternatives go up when we look at the cloud side of it. Now, if they were creating those same EDI integrations on a point-to-point basis, it goes again back to why, when we go from one organization to another, the EDI integration changes. So a 204 communication doesn't look the same, a 210 communication doesn't look the same, a 214 communication doesn't look the same. Yes, there are some instances where you need a different set of information, but it's not like within the same vertical, within the same sub-vertical, if you're looking at the information, it keeps changing over time. So again, we take it away from just pure integration side of things, and we basically are trying to bring it all together and saying, if you want to benchmark your operations, if you want to really see how you are doing against your peers, the only way to come together is to look at the supply chain problems the same way. Not everything has to be the same. You have your uniqueness, all the supply chains, even within an organization, there are multiple supply chains most of the time. When you look at organizations like P&G or HP or any of those places, they have multiple supply chains, and they make sense to have multiple supply chains operating them differently because the end users are different, the customers are different. But at the same time, when we translate that to operational things and benchmarking and standardizing, there are certain parts where you can standardize much more easily. There are certain parts that you have to keep unique. So I like the economies that the cloud provides, basically in terms of integration, but I think we really have to get past the integration part of it, because there is just so much more potential of getting on the cloud and bringing these external parties, making them an integral part of your supply chain.
No, I agree. I mean, I think it's really thinking, much more broadly when you're thinking about, one of the things that I've written about and talked about is, network-based business intelligence and analytics, which obviously you can only get when you've got a community that is, sharing data and information through a common platform, and the ability for a network provider to kind of leverage that data, that information, to provide back to the community network-based intelligence and analytics, to help, again, the ultimate goal of BI and analytics is to help companies make smarter decisions faster. And one of the blind spots that a lot of companies have is understanding how they're doing relative to some external benchmark or other peers out there. And I think that's a real, powerful opportunity that a network-based solution provides. We're coming up a little bit short on time here, so I just want to remind those of you that are watching that if you do have a question or a comment for Ajesh, as we kind of go through, my last 2 or 3 questions here, now's the time to post it. So let's talk now about some of that, kind of functionality now, right? Global transportation management functionality. What are, some of the biggest white spaces or functional capabilities that companies are looking for that you see out there?
So I think about the global transportation management white spaces a little differently, and I'll give you a multi-part response to that, Adrian. Try not to take too much time, but at the same time, when I look at my team, and it's a mix of people with a lot of international transportation experience and a lot of domestic transportation experience. And the way we go about it is we say every single person that joins the team actually has to unlearn a little bit, and then start relearning. Now, unlearning is hard because we've been doing this for so long. I've been doing it for 20 years. A lot of people in my team, they've been doing it for 10 years, 15 years, and longer. Unlearning is hard, but at the same time, when we look at global transportation management, it's not a clear splitting of domestic and international. There are lots of overlaps, and to bring it all together, you have to do it by bringing it together in the same platform, in the same structures, utilizing the same functionality. Now, when we look at the functional pieces, I also like to divide stuff into where the network and the cloud actually provides the most benefit to these companies, and also look at where a prospect or a customer has actually invested a lot in an application that doesn't necessarily take that much advantage of the cloud. So when we look at rating part of it, it basically says a rating service, you have to keep the rates consistent. When you look up a rate from different areas of the organization, you're looking at the same contracts. If you calculate the rates differently using the same rate base, you're doing something wrong. So centralizing that, providing that in a network model, that makes perfect sense. Same way with tendering. Sourcing a lot of data that comes together by bringing it into the platform, it actually makes the process so much easier for everybody. When we look at the planning side of it, that's where a lot of TM implementations have been, and they model a lot of very specific things. We like to leverage that investment that a customer has made. So when we look at the white spaces from that perspective, there are still, of course, I like to say that platform is the biggest white space that we haven't filled up, and I think more and more people have to start doing it. But at the same time, when we go beyond that, I find, and this may be another crazy comment out there, but when I look at the optimization, the way we have done optimization in this space for a long, long time, it has been a heuristics-based optimization. Some of us, I think, have advanced beyond that. Some of us have better optimization than the others. But at the same time, when we look at what cloud brings to us in terms of parallel computing, the extent to which we can go, and we saw this in the fleet planning experience that I talked about earlier. There is so much money we leave on the table when we look at all the stuff that we are trying to do in the optimization, all the different things that we are trying to solve for. It is extremely important to basically utilize what the cloud is bringing us in terms of parallel computing and using that to basically unleash much more advanced technology on the optimization side. When you look at meta heuristics, when you look at machine learning, when you look at artificial intelligence in general, we haven't really used that in the transportation planning space a lot. So a lot of white spaces in there, some of them smaller, some larger. I think the biggest potential that we see is just bring the data together in a platform-centric way, and then start filling up those white spaces instead of trying to treat one TM as a panacea. We actually call it a myth that you can actually manage your transportation operation using one application. The variation in functionality requirements is just so large. It's extremely difficult to do that.
I love the phrase that you started with in terms of the need to unlearn. I'm going to borrow that and noodle on that concept a little bit more down the road, and maybe do a posting based on that, because I think you're right. I mean, I think there is, with just what you just talked about right now, with the advancements in cloud computing, with parallel processing, or artificial intelligence, all those things that are happening. I mean, there really is an opportunity to really approach some of these challenges and opportunities that we have, not only in transportation but in supply chain in general, in very different ways than we have in the past. Even simplistically thinking, just from a pure computing standpoint, things that we couldn't do 5-10 years ago, because it would have taken 2 weeks of computing time. Today you can probably do in an hour or two, right? And so I think there's a lot of opportunities there that are kind of open the door to new ways and new models of doing things. I had the opportunity. Let's kind of ground this a little bit, perhaps with some customer examples, or some of the things that you're seeing customers doing in terms of some of the approaches that you're taking. I had the opportunity to go to your user conference a few weeks back, and I heard some great presentations while I was there. But can you share with us some examples of how leading companies are kind of approaching global transportation management in kind of a different approach?
Of course. So one of the intriguing parts of coming to GT Nexus was we work with a lot of large and complex supply chains. I think HP did a couple of presentations during the session, during the user group, and they are one of the early adopters of how we are going about using the transportation management as a platform kind of approach to create global control towers. They buy into the community concept. They buy into how different parts of the organization have to collaborate, how every other individual has to collaborate as well. Now, the thing that is going on with HP, the way they came to this point was they basically went through multiple TM implementations on their side. They brought in, they tried to do it internally, and they realized that it was a cloud network model that was actually going to bring them to the holy grail, I guess. Now, the other thing that they did also was they also realized that in different geographies they wanted to do it differently. They wanted to adopt a different approach. So they went in with a higher level of outsourcing, let's say in Europe, and relying on the technology, relying on the partners to do a lot of operations there. They go in when they look at the US market, they look at a slightly different setup. When they look at Asia Pacific and Asia Pacific to Europe operations, Europe transportation, when they look at the international side of things, they wanted to slice and dice it multiple different ways. But again, that variation basically demanded that they had these partnerships and these applications that they had invested in quite a lot, that they wanted to leverage parts of it, and at the same time, they realized that they didn't really have end-to-end supply chain visibility. So the way they went about it was more from a geographical implementation of the control layer, bringing different geographies on the platform, using that in conjunction with wherever the functional white spaces were, wherever the functional gaps were, and filling those. Now, in parallel, they went in and they basically said, we are going to embark on this global supply chain visibility endeavor. And so the transportation part of it came in through the control layer, but they basically started connecting the manufacturing side of it, the whole in-transit as well as at-rest visibility to create that global visibility side of it. So a large dependence on the community, and they have been, since they joined, they were our first adopter of the platform approach on the transportation management side. And they have been contributing in the community setup, we call it the Shipper Council, driving a lot of initiatives because they buy into the whole physical, financial, and data coming together. They are doing a lot of work on that side. But it was a different approach to dealing with how you actually look at your supply chain. Now, the other customer that I wanted to actually bring up would be somebody like a P&G. And the whole approach of the platform and the control layer, the way we look at it, is it provides you the ultimate level of flexibility on how you want to deploy, how you look at your supply chain, and actually recreate that in this kind of model. So P&G has been, I think, has been rolling out an industry-leading TMS, a traditional TMS, for a long, long time. They looked at it more in terms of domestic or international, or in terms of modes. And that's pretty much how they divide it up. But at the same time, they realized when we are talking about network-centric things, taking advantage of, they were talking to the same carriers through point integrations for different business units, for different modes. At the same time, when they started looking at how they were spending the money, bringing it all together, it just wasn't working. So that's where they took advantage of the tendering and visibility again, trying to enable it off of a central network-based platform, and then going to look at mode-specific functionality that they needed. If they wanted to do ocean bookings, they were doing it on this platform, on this piece of technology. When they wanted to do domestic route planning, they were doing it on a different platform. So different approaches, different ways of looking at things. At the same time, I think you'll see a common thread. There are those, there is that platform that always comes in, and they went in, they realized that most of the times that we see, most of these customers, they actually have, they don't go in first thinking that ATM is going to not solve their problems in this regard. All these companies, they have gone through, they have a lot of experience, they have been seeing their supply chains change. So, and they understand the importance of visibility. They understand where they are driving their visibility initiative, what they are trying to achieve. So just a couple of examples there. There are other companies that are trying to do things differently and still achieving some of the cost reduction initiatives. But when we look at global end-to-end visibility and taking control of your transportation, those were the two examples I wanted to bring up.
No, those are great examples, and I think it illustrates how, you know, how different in some ways their approaches were, their thinking is in terms of how they're rolling this out. But again, you know, coming down to that, you know, end-to-end visibility and how the platform approach can help them each achieve their unique approach to how they're looking at global transportation management. You know, the HP story I loved. It was one of my favorite presentations from your user conference, and I wrote about it recently in terms of how they're looking at the I think he termed it, the gentleman who presented the social supply chain, which was really bringing in, the communities of suppliers and customers and internal communities, and leveraging some of these network and almost social networking type of capabilities in order to facilitate communication and collaboration, not only internally but externally as well. So that was certainly one of the case studies that I enjoyed the most. We're kind of out of time here, so I'm just going to go straight to my last question, Ajesh. So, as a way to wrap up, I mean, what questions should companies ask themselves to assess if their global transportation management capabilities are, best in class, and what's the first step they should take to kind of move up the capability curve?
That's a tough question, Adrian. It's what we basically see when, and different people respond to these things differently. So when we look at today's supply chain and we say, do I have an infrastructure that can actually meet the requirements there? And what are those requirements? Agility is one of the bigger requirements. So when we say, when the ash cloud went up, how long did it take for you to react to it? When Fukushima happened, there was a lot of disruption in the supply chain. Whatever disruption you experienced in the supply chain, it may be large, it may be small, how long does it take you to react to that? And when you react to it, how microscopic can you get when you react to it? So when we talk about things like transportation spend, we see a lot of times it basically takes a whole study, a week, for people to come up with their transportation spend where they are comfortable that this is how much we really spend, not just taking into account the accounting side of it, but at the same time, a business unit within a large complex organization, it just goes to where you say, how am I managing it? Am I able to see things move end to end? Am I able to respond to disruptions? I think those things come into play a lot. Now, how do you go about changing that picture? So we have to take this separation away from the myth of one TMS, like we call it. We have to understand that it's not an application, it's not a technology approach only that is going to take us there. So we have to basically figure out, can I have an infrastructure that actually allows me to relate the different information that is going across, that is moving across the supply chain? Am I able to see it? Am I able to measure it? Only then can you control it. So bringing that thing together, connecting your different silos of your supply chain, I think that becomes critical. At the same time, you want to leverage all the investments you have made in the applications and the partners. When you try to switch a partner, every single instance, it becomes such an expensive proposition. We keep moving along the same path. We basically keep going on without switching partners because it is expensive on our end. The benefits that you can realize, you cannot quantify them a lot of times. So the whole point of the platform, the whole approach to the network is that you want to create an agility in your supply chain, and your transportation network is a part of it. It has to enable it. It also has to allow you to rationalize your supply chain, rationalize your partner set, rationalize your application set, not move to one single application, one single partner, but be able to use them without losing the connectivity in your supply chain.
Great comments. I like the way at the beginning you kind of tied it into kind of supply chain risk management in some ways, which is an area that I've talked a lot before in terms of when it comes to visibility. It really is the foundation to managing any kind of supply chain disruption, quickly and effectively. The metrics I like to talk about is, time to resolution, right? How quickly can you recover from a supply chain disruption, and can you minimize the impact of that disruption? And I think that's one good metric to kind of align your global transportation and more broadly end-to-end supply chain visibility efforts around. With that, Ajesh, we're out of time. But again, like I always say with all my guests, you know, we always manage to scratch the surface on these topics. But I appreciate you making the time to kind of get the conversation started on this very important topic.
Thanks a lot, Adrian. It's always wonderful to talk to you.
I want to thank those of you that joined us live today, and for those of you that are watching this program on demand, if you do have a question or a comment for Ajesh, you can find the episode on talkinglogistics.com. You can post a question or comment there, and I'm sure Ajesh will be more than happy to respond via that platform. So with that, thank you very much for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.